Greetings, guys and gaias. I am Desideria, and this is my weekly reading from the book called The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth. If you don't have a copy of this book, please send me an email at xanthosearthkeepers@gmail.com, and I can send you a PDF file. So the preface is called Wheel Life. This book is a wheel, she began. It begins and ends with the word beginning. Like a year, it has 4 parts, 52 chapters, 4 seasons, 52 weeks, 13 lunations, though not symmetric. A she-wheel. It unrolls her story, a description of the female journey through our human time on Earth. Gyrocycles of great myth and small data, poetry and numbers, dream and invention. Ice and fire. Cro-Magnon caves and inquisitional burnings. Night and day. Her silent presence and his noisy history. And this new edition appears now in 1991. 9, the magic number of muses, crones, and that first minstrel, mathematically observed wheel, the moon. 1, which we are and must become. Wheels within wheels within wheels, cellular, personal, local, global, cosmic, and begin again. This is not planned, it just happens. As the world turns, as witches spin, as what disappears in the telescope reappears in the microscope, and vice versa, it seems to be organic. I ride a bicycle, a 3-speed Schwinn, green with food-gathering baskets, solidly built but in need of total overhaul. For 15 years, it has been my sole transportation, besides feet, and my Irish mood. A wheel is a vehicle, a mood, a mode of direction. My bike wheels are not precisely round, warped rims, threadbare tires, badly braked, punctured seasonally by goat heads and broken glass. Asymmetric, bumpy, my ride through life wobbles. But it moves, it works. It renews itself. Strange Ouroboros wheels, stubbornly to get the job done. The revolving bumps underline the rhythmic weirdness of the weather I must roll through. Planetary, impersonal. The Earth, too, has its wobble. As in winter, in the huge wobble of the Ice Age, humanity evolved itself. So most of this book's work was done in unlikely winter. It was December 1976 when Woman's Spirit magazine, for whom I had read poetry, sent me Monica's pamphlet mimeographed earlier that year in England. I lived on welfare in northern New Mexico with my son and daughter. Weekly, I biked 25 to 50 miles round trip to Teos through wind, sage, dust, mud, lightning, snow, for food, supplies, and mail. Our adobe house on a Spanish farm was heated by piñon wood in an old cast-iron kitchen stove. I rode at a wheel table, a wooden spool once used to wind electric cable. Working through winter, I doubled Monica's 100 pages. Rewrote, reconstructed, added new material, sections, and titles. Woman's Spirit could not print this enlargement. 4 years later, in 1981, it was published by Rainbow Press in Norway, distributed in America by Woman's Spirit. True to its winter nature, this book lay long dormant, but vital, under snow. Winter again, 1984. Monica had made contact with the Harper & Row editor at the 1984 International Women's Book Fair in London. With this go signal, I began writing the present book. Still in Teos, still on a bicycle, but the gears of welfare existence were grinding harder. Rent, food, utilities had doubled, but benefits, under Reagan, were frozen. So were we. Teos is 7,000 feet in the southern Rockies, with ground snow through winter. Temperatures of minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit on the deepest nights. I could afford to burn wood only 2 to 3 hours each evening. In daytime, the kitchen thermometer read 38 to 40 degrees from December through March. Through these months, I wrote 8 hours daily, sometimes wearing a down jacket, but the bulk impeded typing. Using material and notes from earlier writing and workshops I'd done in San Diego on women's religion, witchcraft, and global politics, I expanded the 80 printed pages of the Rainbow Press edition into the present book. Nightly, we huddled together, 2 daughters and I, in sleeping bags on the living room floor, sandwiched by blankets, dogs, and cats. Ancient creatures in our cave. Bedrooms were cold storage. From the window of my youngest daughter's room, a foot-long icicle, 4 inches wide, crawled inside and down the wall. Our personal, microcosmic glaciation. It didn't begin to melt until mid-March. So be it. Winter is the time of our content. In the Mule Mountains of southern Arizona, winter 1985, there was much cold. Occult work to be done on the manuscript before it could be printed, text corrections and documentation, footnotes, bibliography, permissions, illustration, selection, and placement. I worked at the wheel table, 5,500 feet, no heat. The next winter, 1986, I proofed the galleys twice, sitting at a big table in a dark kitchen in a downtown barrio, a house of Slate-Stodel Mexican witch goddess. Still no heat, no hot water, but by then I was in Tucson, where even winter is warm. Winter again, 1984. Monica had made contact with the Harper & Row editor at the 1984 International Women's Book Fair in London. With this go signal, I began writing the present book. Still in Teos, still on a bicycle, but the gears of welfare existence were grinding harder. Rent, food, utilities had doubled, but benefits, under Reagan, were frozen. So were we. Teos is 7,000 feet in the southern Rockies, with ground snow through winter. Temperatures of minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit on the deepest nights. I could afford to burn wood only 2 to 3 hours each evening. In daytime, the kitchen thermometer read 38 to 40 degrees from December through March. Through these months, I wrote 8 hours daily, sometimes wearing a down jacket, but the bulk impeded typing. Using material and notes from earlier writing and workshops I'd done in San Diego on women's religion, witchcraft, and global politics, I expanded the 80 printed pages of the Rainbow Press edition into the present book. Nightly, we huddled together, 2 daughters and I, in sleeping bags on the living room floor, sandwiched by blankets, dogs, and cats. Ancient creatures in our cave. Bedrooms were cold storage. From the window of my youngest daughter's room, a foot-long icicle, 4 inches wide, crawled inside and down the wall. Our personal, microcosmic glaciation. It didn't begin to melt until mid-March. So be it. Winter is the time of our content. In the Mule Mountains of southern Arizona, winter 1985, there was much cold. Occult work to be done on the manuscript before it could be printed. Text corrections and documentation, footnotes, bibliography, permissions, illustration, selection, and placement. I worked at the wheel table, 5,500 feet, no heat. The next winter, 1986, I proofed the galleys twice, sitting at a big table in a dark kitchen in a downtown barrio, a house of a Mexican witch goddess. Still no heat, no hot water. But by then, I was in Tucson, where even winter is warm. A wheel is also a torture instrument, where witches were bound for punishment. With my half of the advance, I left welfare. Publication was then delayed a year until May of 1987 to complete the manuscript and production work. Then, The first year of royalties was in the minus column. In the Mule Mountains of southern Arizona, winter 1985, there was much cold. Occult work to be done on the manuscript before it could be printed. Text corrections and documentation, footnotes, bibliography, permissions, illustration selection and placement. I worked at the wheel table, 5,500 feet, no heat. The next winter, 1986, I proofed the galleys twice, sitting at a big table in a dark kitchen in a downtown barrio, a house of a Mexican witch goddess. Still no heat, no hot water. But by then, I was in Tucson, where even winter is warm. A wheel is also a torture instrument, where witches were bound for punishment. With my half of the advance, I left welfare. Publication was then delayed a year until May of 1987 to complete the manuscript and production work. Then the first year of royalties was in the minus column until the advance and author's share of publication costs were repaid. Meanwhile, I had no money. My daughters went to live with their brother and his wife in Albuquerque. Into their basement storage went my belongings, bike, books, notes, typewriter. And I became a bag lady on the streets of Tucson. For 13 months, off and on, I was one of those statistics. No job, no income, no home. All the heat I'd not had during the icy months of writing curved around to hit me in the face. Intense 100-plus degrees of a desert city brick oven streets from May through October. Windless, or the wind blew relentlessly electric, like a laundromat of open dryers. I was on foot, age 51. I carried a big purple drawstring bag full of my life, not much. Parked cars, boarded up houses, barrio porches and backyards, garages used as shooting galleries, booths of 24-hour restaurants. This is where I slept. Nighttime helicopter surveillance and police raids entered my real dream. Also, solicitations for sex, threats of beatings and death, abandonment to nocturnal streets, or the militant mercies of charity shelters. Days I hung out in parks, plazas, courthouses, libraries. City fountains were multiple to bathe, wash clothes, cool off. Then you collect the coins. An air-conditioned oasis, Burger King, Carl's Jr., 59-cent bought endless coffee refills and free newspapers, i.e. culture. Public restrooms I also used for laundry and personal hygiene. I underwent malnutrition, began menopause, learned survival from my street partner. On the litmus paper of my own flesh, I kept notes of my experience. In my bag, I carried a 9-page resume, 20-odd years of feminist and literary activity, including this just-published book. I applied for editorial work at the University of Arizona Press, university library work, an open seat on the Tucson Women's Commission. No one could use me, except a bankrupting downtown motel, later closed by the city. Homeless people were channeled there by charity agencies to do maid work and maintenance. We labored 10 hours daily, 6 days a week, struggled up and down in one defective elevator, 4 floors, lugging one semi-functioning vacuum cleaner, running out of everything else. Our laundry room floor, strewn with dirty sheets and towels, kept flooding with backflow from the pool. The young manager, son of the owner, quietly partied in a 4th-floor suite. Cleaning it, I observed he was reading Donald Trump's The Art of the Deal. When my first paycheck bounced, I quit. For my fall into the street, I had no explanatory bad habits, except poetry, to win sympathy from social agencies. I don't drink, smoke, use dope, seem officially crazy or criminal. Simply, I wrote a good book, left welfare, and hit the skids. This wheel is surreal, and it continues turning. My personal events are tiny wobbles amidst huge cyclings. Global wheels revolve, vast familiar changes. Modes of world control shift back and forth from terror to seduction. Icy political walls fall. Hot markets erupt. War gods retract oiled missiles. Money gods open shopping malls. Overnight, they reverse. Peace is bulldozed for a new battle zone. Universal freedom to buy, they say, means individual freedom to be. Then the money disappears. Chaos, tyranny, extinct all rights, needs, dreams beyond a price tag. Or a gun. Inside these manufactured wheels, final gears grind. Earth depletion, pollution, trash. Our planet of biologic forms, venally redefined as functions of a thing-producing machinery. Forests, elephants, ozone, disappearing. Healthy soil, air, water, all depleting. Human place and integrity are endangered species. They won't appear again on this wheel. For women, counterspin. Markets are freed, businesses deregulated, but state and technological control over reproduction increases. Female bodies are used lavishly to sell goods. We still don't own our own wombs. We freely enter careers and are beaten, raped, killed just as freely. Successful women proliferate. So do the numbers of malnourished, poor, sick, and homeless women and our planet's children. A wheel is directions energy, also a steering device, a will. Among circling and exploding stars, how do we dare to live? I look in my cracked mirror, personal, political, cosmic. With the great cosmic mother, I've made a journey of creative female endurance. The book, readers say, gives us back her story. Women's creation of human culture, our epic struggle to imaginatively survive and transform the world to which we gave birth. Our collective story amazes, enrages, energizes us. Individual lives are illumined and empowered by it. Women and men are returned to themselves. My small epos, the book's writing and after, underscores, I hope, this theme. Female spirit, the goddess in us, is not fragile or new, not an invention of privileged women or an escapist New Age elite. We are tough and ancient, tried by 1,000,000 years of ice and fire. On enormous and minute wheels of pain and beauty we have turned. The spinning wills of witches transmute our experience into worlds, dream into real, need into art, difficult fact into daily vision. Skilled in memory, muscled by quantum leaps, we return to tell and respell our story. Sometimes uphill, against odds and harsh winds, my metaphoric saga is every woman's. Knowledge of our truly revolutionary past can resolve our present dilemmas. Daughters of Earth, all this whirling past is in us, of us. We are powered by experience. Now we can create and consecrate our Earth's next turn, the magic future. Nothing is easy. Work we thought done must be redone. Generations of richly cynical young people need our cronish views and mythic tools. Communal action is a large wheel. Within it, each personal will must passionately spin to face hardship, anonymous conditions, to forego, disbelieve, apparent access, success, to defiantly redefine and redo the real work. Sacred, practical retrieval of the female, earth. A transfusion of our spiritual reality into the body, politic, economic, is not easy. My experience is revelatory. I could change God's sex. I couldn't pay my rent. I could rewrite his story. I can't afford to eat. I survive, but with a grimmer face, a stronger, more ancient face. Our stubborn struggle, too, is organic. Earth, alone among known planets, wills life repeatedly from her own winter. Travels, tough bag lady, through conscious nights and days of her own orbit, bombarded by meteors, doubts, the terrific noise of time and human traffic. All of us, together, each of us, brief and alone, travel with her. Her survival story is ours. This wheel is a book. She began, again. Let it roll. It's Barbara Moore, October 1990. And now for the introduction. The Great Mother in her many aspects, maiden, raging warrior, benevolent mother, death-dealing and all-wise crone, unknowable and ultimate ward, is now powerfully re-emerging and rising again in human consciousness as we approach the 21st century. Isis, Maulisa, Demeter, Gaia, Shakti, Dakinis, Shekinah, Astarte, Ishtar, Rhea, Freya, Nerthus, Brigid, Danu, call her what you may, she has been with us from the beginning and awaits us now. She is the beauty of the green earth, the life-giving waters, the consuming fire, the radiant moon, and the fiery sun. She is star goddess and spider woman. She weaves the luminous web that creates the universe. As Earth, the great planetary spirit being, she germinates life within her dark womb. After thousands of years of life-denying and anti-evolutionary patriarchal cultures that have raped, ravaged, and polluted the earth, she returns. The earth's immune system is breaking down, and so is ours. Her soil, atmosphere, plant life, trees, and animal worlds are exhausted beyond endurance. All beings are suffering and can take no more. Based in matricide, the death of all nature, and the utter exploitation of women, Western culture has now run itself into the ground, and there is no other way but to return to the mother who gives us life. If we are to survive, we have to attune yet again to the spirits of nature, and we must learn to hear the voices of the ancestors who speak to us from their other world realms. There is a growing feminization of poverty worldwide, especially in the third world, more truly of the first world, where women's livelihoods and lands are being taken from them, much thanks to Western U.S. imperialism and so-called development schemes that exclude women. In the Western world, the assault on women's last remnants of autonomous powers, the destruction of our ancient knowledge of healing and of magical technology that enhanced our psychic powers as well as the fertility of the land, came about with the witch hunts that lasted more than 300 years. In Europe, it has taken women until now to even dare to think of our own thoughts and to articulate them, to dream our own dreams. We are the wise women returning at this dangerous hour because women worldwide are and always were the guardians of the living earth, as are all the surviving native, tribal, shamanistic peoples who still commune with the spirits. I was involved with the anarchist and anti-Vietnam War movements in Sweden in 1960s. I've also been active in the women's movement in Britain since the beginning. My political activism always grew out of my spiritual understandings of the earth as the living mother, because the goddess is injured wherever there is injustice, wanton cruelty, poverty, and pollution. Of course, the goddess is not just benevolent and fertile. She is also death-dealing and the destroyer. But these are natural forces, neither good nor bad, in the impersonal universal dance. But what I am speaking of here is the destruction brought about by the selfish and despotic patriarchs, male brotherhoods, who hate organic life in itself and desire to become disembodied, thereby returning to an abstract and impossible father who desires sterile death with no rebirth for us all. I do not believe that it is biologically given in men to be violent and destructive. There would have never been peaceful maternal cultures such as we explore in this book if this were so. I am primarily an artist, a creator of visionary images, who also felt an urgent need to communicate through writing. The reason I originally wrote the first pamphlet about the ancient goddess in 1975, titled The Ancient Religion of the Great Cosmic Mother of All, and run off on stencils, was because I needed to clarify to myself and to others where my images came from. By then, I had created many goddess paintings. My early images had a strange, archaic quality about them, as if they came from another time and space. At the time, I felt utterly alone in my work and in what I was attempting to express. God Giving Birth, 1968, is a sacred painting in which I wanted to holistically express my growing religious belief in the Great Mother as the cosmic spirit and generative force in the universe. To my utter amazement, it nearly brought me to court over the years for obscenity and blasphemy. The inspiration for the painting was the natural home birth of my second son in 1961, now 29 years ago, which felt to me like a first initiation to the Great Mother and opened me to her in visions and dreams. I always experience my art as what can only be described as a shamanic process, entering into a state of being or mind where knowledge is available from past, present, and future. This way of knowing belongs to the lunar mother, who is both dark and light. She of the dark nights and inner radiant light, like that of the moon, who gives us dreams and illuminations. No surprise, perhaps, that many of my images appear to be moonlit, and that I have been sorely tested by the dark light mother who has taken back to herself 2 of my beloved sons. My youngest son, part Afro-American and Swedish, was run down and killed in front of my eyes in the Basque Country in the south of France. My oldest son died from lymphoma cancer in July of 1987, and my new journey began through grief and numbing pain. Truly, a darkness of my soul during which I didn't want to live and at times hated everything alive. I have come through this still loving this beautiful earth, our mother. I have now returned to painting and writing, exhibiting and traveling. It gave me hope to watch the courage and the loving energy my eldest son radiated before his death in spite of his pain and illness. My sons communicate with me in dreams. I have exhibited with other goddess artists in Britain, Germany, and Scandinavia. Most recently, I took part in 2 exhibitions, The Goddess Re-Emerging in Glastonbury, September 1989, and with Chris Castle in Stones and the Goddess in Berkeley, May 1990. Everywhere I have traveled, I have also given slideshow talks about my art and life, ancient cultures, the goddess, and her sacred sites. I live in Bristol, a city in the southwest of England, not far from Glastonbury and Avebury, ancient sacred places of the Neolithic Mother. Glastonbury Tor, or the Isle of Avalon, is a 3-dimensional labyrinth with an indwelling goddess. With Bloodwell Chalicewell in its skirts, it's an otherworld place of death and magical rebirth. Silbury Mound, the pregnant womb of the earth, along with the Avebury Stone Circle and the West Kennet Long Barrow, abode of the Dark Mother, is the most sacred and magically powerful goddess site in the Northern Hemisphere. It was here that I had a transformative experience in an altered state in 1978 that utterly changed my life and work. It was on Silbury that for the first time I truly knew that the earth is her living body. I also felt her grief and pain, her great love and rage. It was this experience that tore me apart. It also gave me joy, and I had to leave the city. I went to live in Pembrokeshire in the ancient Welsh countryside, where there are so many remains of the Neolithic and Celtic past. So many holy wells, standing stones, and sacred trees. Here I learned to grow a garden, to live with the seasons, to follow the moon in her changes. I have journeyed like a pilgrim in the British Isles, in Ireland, and in the Scottish Highlands and Islands to many of the so numerous sacred sites. I have followed the trails of the Celts back to their sacred places in Germany and have visited Carnac in Bretagne. I have had powerful experiences at Newgrange in the Boyne Valley in Ireland and at the Callanish Stone Circle on Lewis in the Outer Hebrides. The stone circles, wells, and the mounds are trance-induced places, window areas into other realities, where the voices of the ancestors, the blessed dead, the shining ones, or the fairies speak to us in visions, dreams, giving healing and prophesy from the magical otherworld realms of the Mother. The great cosmic Mother is a central part of this reemergence of the Mother and of another and far more ancient consciousness intelligence. We are pioneers in this great movement, along with many other writers, artists, poets, and thinkers that will have to succeed or we will die. I want to make it clear that Barbara Moore is the book's main author. The reason for this is that when the time came to rework and extend our original work, my youngest son had just been killed, and I had moved back to Bristol to live with my other son, who was suffering from cancer. I was unable to work on the book. At that point, I even feared it. Barbara Moore, poet, scholar, and word magician, had to spend months writing, researching, and vastly extending this book from our earlier and more collaborative The Ancient Religion of the Great Cosmic Mother of All, published in 1981 by Rainbow Press in Norway. That version, in its turn, was worked out by both of us over several years from the original pamphlet that had been written and conceived by me in 1975. Our book has indeed been a very long labor of love and has gone through many transformations along the way. I want to thank Jean and Ruth Mountain Grove of the former Oregon Woman Spirit Journal, who brought me and Barbara Moore together originally, for the support they gave. They also distributed the Rainbow Press version of the book in the United States. I also want to thank Jan Vindelheim of Rainbow Press in Trondheim for having had the vision and courage to publish our book in English. Being a small alternative publisher without a great international distribution network, this was indeed a gamble. I also want to thank Gisela Ottmer and Rosemary Merkel from Braunschweig in Germany, who were inspired by the Woman Magic, Celebrating the Goddess Within Us, collective exhibition that I was traveling with in Europe during the early 1980s, and took it upon themselves to translate and publish our book in German. It was published in 1985 by their new Labyrinth Press. Blessed be Monica's Jew, July 1990. Now remember, the preface was written by Barbara Moore, and this introduction was written by Monica Shu. And now we're going to begin Chapter 1. Women's Early Culture. Beginnings. The First Sex. In the beginning, we were all created female. Chapter 1. In the beginning was a very female sea. For 2.5 billion years on Earth, all life forms floated in the womb-like environment of the planetary ocean, nourished and protected by its fluid chemicals, rocked by the lunar tidal rhythms. Charles Darwin believed the menstrual cycle originated here, organically echoing the moon pulse of the sea, and because this longest period of life's time on Earth was dominated by marine forms reproducing parthenogenetically, he concluded that the female principle was primordial. In the beginning, life did not gestate within the body of any creature, but within the ocean womb containing all organic life. There were no specialized sex organs. Rather, a generalized female existence reproduced itself within the female body of the sea. Before more complex life forms could develop and move onto land, it was necessary to miniaturize the oceanic environment, to reproduce it on a small and mobile scale. Soft, moist eggs deposited on dry ground and exposed to air would die. Life could not move beyond the water-hugging amphibian stage. In the course of evolution, the ocean, the protective and nourishing space, the amniotic fluids, even the lunar tidal rhythm was transferred into the individual female body, and the penis, a mechanical device for land reproduction, evolved. The penis first appeared in the age of reptiles about 200 million years ago. Our archetypal association of the snake with the phallus contains, no doubt, this genetic memory. This is a fundamental and recurring pattern in nature. Life is a female environment in which the male appears, often periodically, and created by the female to perform highly specialized tasks related to species reproduction and a more complex evolution. Daphnia, a freshwater crustacean, reproduces several generations of females by parthenogenesis. The egg and its own polar body mate to form a complete set of genes for a female offspring. Once annually, at the end of the year's cycle, a short-lived male group is produced. The males specialize in manufacturing leathery egg cases able to survive the winter. Among honeybees, the drone group is produced and regulated by sterile daughter workers and the fertile queen. Drones exist to mate with the queen. An average of 7 drones per hive accomplish this act each season, and then the entire male group is destroyed by the workers. Among whiptail lizards in the American Southwest, 4 species are parthenogenetic. Males are unknown among the desert grassland plateau and Chihuahua whiptails, and have been found only rarely among the checkered whiptails. Among mammals, even among humans, parthenogenesis is not technically impossible. Every female egg contains a polar body with a complete set of chromosomes. The polar body and the egg, if united, could form a daughter embryo. In fact, ovarian cysts are unfertilized eggs that have joined with their polar bodies, been implanted in the ovarian wall, and started to develop there. This is not to say that males are an unnecessary sex. Parthenogenesis is a cloning process. Sexual reproduction, which enhances the variety and health of the gene pool, is necessary for the kind of complex evolution that has produced the human species. The point being made here is simply that, when it comes to the two sexes, one of us has been around a lot longer than the other. In The Nature and Evolution of Female Sexuality, Mary Jane Shurfree, M.D., described her discovery in 1961 of something called the inductor theory. The inductor theory stated that all mammalian embryos, male and female, are anatomically female during the early stages of fetal life. Shurfree wondered why this theory had been buried in the medical literature since 1951, completely ignored by the profession. The men who made this her story-making discovery simply didn't want it to be true. Shurfree pioneered the discussion of the inductor theory, and now, with the modifications based on further data, its findings are accepted as facts of mammalian, including human, development. As Stephen Jay Gould describes it, the embryo in its first 8 weeks is an indifferent creature with bisexual potential. In the 8th week, if a Y chromosome-bearing sperm fuses with the egg, the gonads will develop into testes, which secrete androgen, which in turn induces male genitalia to develop. In the absence of androgen, the embryo develops into a female. There is a difference in the development of the internal and external genitalia, however. For the internal genitalia, the fallopian tubes and ovaries are the sperm-carrying ducts. The early embryo contains precursors of both sexes. In the presence or absence of androgen, as one set develops, the other degenerates. With the external genitalia, the different organs of male and female develop along diverging lines from the same precursor. This means, in effect, that the clitoris and the penis are the same organ, formed from the same tissue. The labia majora of the scrotum are one, indistinguishable in the early embryonic stages. In the presence of androgen, the two lips simply grow longer, fold over, and fuse along the midline, forming the scrotal sac. Gould concludes, the female course of development is, in a sense, biologically intrinsic to all mammals. It is the pattern that unfolds in the absence of any hormonal influence. The male route is a modification induced by secretion of androgens from the developing testes. The vulnerability of the male newcomer within the female environment is well known. Vaginal secretions are more destructive to the Y-bearing sperm. The mortality rate is higher among neonate and infant males. Within the womb, the male fetus, for the first 2 months, is protected by being virtually indistinguishable from a female. After that, it must produce large amounts of the masculinizing hormone in order to define itself as male, to achieve and to maintain its sexual identity. For all we know, the Near Eastern myths upon which our Western mythologies are built, those which portray the young god and hero battling against a female dragon, have some analog here in utero, where the male fetus wages a kind of chemical war against rebecoming female. For now, it is enough to say that maleness among mammals is not a primary state, but differentiates from the original female biochemistry and anatomy. The original libido of warm-blooded animals is female, and the male or maleness is a derivation from this primary female pattern. Why, then, did the medical men, the scientists, take longer to figure out this basic biological fact than it took them to split the atom? And why, once this fact was noted, did they turn around and bury it in professional silence for 10 years until a woman dug it up again? Why, indeed? For about 2,000 years of Western history, female sexuality was denied. When it could not be denied, it was condemned as evil. The female was seen as divinely designed to be a passive vessel, serving reproductive purposes only. In one not-too-ancient dictionary, clitoris was defined as a rudimentary organ, while masculinity equaled the cosmic generative force. With Freud, female sexuality was not so much rediscovered as pathologized. Freud dismissed the clitoris as an undeveloped masculine organ and defined original libido as male. Clitoral eroticism was reduced to a perverse neurosis. Even after Masters and Johnson's laboratory studies were published in Human Sexual Response in 1966, their findings were not integrated into psychoanalytical theory. In Mary Jane Sherfy's research during that period, she found not one work of comparative anatomy that described or even mentioned the deeper-lying clitoral structures, yet every other structure of the human body was described in living detail. Even today, with our relative sophistication of 1987, we are frequently whistled at by magazine headlines that promise breathless articles announcing the discovery of a new spot or a G-spot, an X-spot located within the vagina. Within all these new spots exists the old wistful desire to deny the existence of the clitoris as a trigger organ of female orgasm. Why? There is the generalized traditional fear of female sexuality. Further, there is discomfort with the similarity with the common origin of the female clitoris and the male penis. Women are used to hearing the clitoris described as an undeveloped penis. Men are not used to thinking of the penis as an overdeveloped clitoris. Finally, and most seriously, there is a profound psychological and institutional reluctance to face the repercussions of the fact that the female clitoris is the only organ in the human body whose purpose is exclusively that of erotic stimulation and release. What does this mean? It means that for the human female, alone among all Earth's life forms, sexuality and reproduction are not inseparable. It is the male penis, carrier of both semen and sexual response, that is simultaneously procreative and erotic. If we wanted to reduce one of the sexes to a purely reproductive function on the basis of its anatomy, and we don't, it would be the male sex that qualified for such a reduction, not the female, not the human female. But these are only biological facts. These are only biological realities. As we know, facts and realities can be and are systematically ignored in the service of established ideologies. Throughout the world today, virtually all religious, cultural, economic, and political institutions stand where they were built centuries ago on the solid foundation of an erroneous concept, a concept that assumes the psychic passivity, the creative inferiority, and the sexual secondariness of women. This enshrined concept states that men exist to create the human world, while women exist to reproduce humans. Period. If we argue that data exists, not solely biological, but archaeological, mythological, anthropological, and historical data, which refutes the universality of this erroneous concept, we are told to shut up, because something called God supports the erroneous concept, and that's all that matters. That's the final word. Throughout the world, throughout what we know of history, something called God has been used to support the denial, the condemnation, and the mutilation of female sexuality, of the female sex, ourselves. Today in parts of Africa, predominantly among African Muslims, but also among African Christians and Jews, and some tribal beliefs, young girls are still subjected to clitoridectomy. This surgery, often performed by older women with broken glass or knives, excises the clitoris, severing the nerves of the orgasm. The operation is intended to force the girl to concentrate on her vagina as a reproductive vessel. Infibulation, a more thorough operation, removes the labia minora and much of the labia majora. The girl is then closed up with thorns or required to lie with her legs tied together until her entire vaginal orifice is fused shut, with a straw inserted to allow passage of urine and menstrual blood. On the wedding night, the young woman is slit open by a midwife or her husband. Further cutting and reclosing is performed before and after childbirth. Complications from these surgeries are numerous, including death from infection, hemorrhage, inability to urinate, scar tissue preventing dilation during labor, painful coitus, and infertility due to chronic pelvic infection. In 1976, an estimated 10 million women were involved in this operation. And something called God justified it, a God who supposedly created young girls as filthy sex maniacs who must then be mutilated to turn them into docile breeders. The word infibulation comes from the Latin fibula, meaning a clasp. Those civilized Romans, great highway builders, also invented the technology of fastening metal clasps through the prepuces of young girls to enforce chastity. This practice was copied by Christian crusaders during the early Middle Ages in Europe. They locked up their wives and daughters in metal chastity belts and then took the keys with them while they were gone, often for many years, fighting for God in the Near East. And lest through hypocrisy and racism we dismiss these practices as merely barbaric or ancient, we must recall the clitoridectomies were performed in the last century on young girls and women in both Europe and America. This surgery, very popular with 19th century Victorians, was inflicted on any female considered to be oversexed, or as a punishment for masturbation, or as a cure for madness. These determinations were all made by male relatives, male physicians, and male clerics, and the women involved had no legal say in the matter. These are extreme examples of the repression and mutilation of female sexuality, always sanctioned, however remotely and dishonestly, by something called God. All the other repressions and mutilations of the body, of the mind, of the soul, of our experienced female selves are so well known and documented that they need no numeration at this point. We can all make our own lists. The point is this. Wherever repression of female sexuality and of the female sex exists, and at the present writing, this is everywhere on earth, we find the same underlying assumptions. These are ontological assumptions, assumptions made at the very root of things about the nature of life itself. They are, 1, that the world was created by a male deity figure or God. 2, that existing world orders or cultures were made by and for men with God's sanction. 3, that females are an auxiliary sex who exist to serve and populate these male world orders. 4, that autonomous female sexuality poses a wild and lethal threat to these world orders and therefore must be controlled and repressed. And finally, 5, that God's existence as a male sanctions this repression. The perfect circularity or tautology of these assumptions only helps to bind them more securely around the human psyche. That they are as erroneous as they are universal seems to pose no problem to their upholders. After all, wherever we go on earth, every intact institution, religious, legal, governmental, economic, military, communications, and customs is built on the solid slab of these assumptions, and that's a pretty entrenched error. In the post-World War II United States, as well as in Europe and most of the world generally, we've gone through a secularizing period in which some of these assumptions have been loosened up and even been made to crumble under questioning, but now the backlash is upon us. Today, spokespeople for various fundamentalist religious beliefs use modern media to broadcast a very old idea, that female sexuality, feminist demands for abortion, contraception, reproductive autonomy, child care, equal pay, psychological integrity, constitutes a threat to our civilization, and this amounts to a blasphemy against God. Whores of Babylon, Darwin's theory of evolution, and the menace of world communism all somehow get subliminally mixed up with this feminist threat, for some very good historic and psychological reasons which we will explore later. For now, it is enough to say that God and civilization are loaded concepts, loaded with dynamite, that can always be brought in to end an argument that cannot otherwise be refuted. Or for those who don't lean too heavily on God or who major in civilization, you can always quote an anthropologist. For just as established religions assume the maleness of God, just as Freud and psychoanalysts assume the maleness of libido, so have the social sciences, and in particular anthropology, assumed the generic maleness of human evolution. Both popular and academic anthropological writers have presented us with scenarios of human evolution that feature almost exclusively the adventures and inventions of man the hunter, man the toolmaker, man the territorial marker, and so forth. Woman is not comprehended as an evolutionary or evolutionizing creature. She is treated rather as an auxiliary to a male-dominated evolutionary process. She mothers him, she mates him, she cooks his dinner, she follows around after him picking up his loose rocks. He evolves, she follows. He evolutionizes, she adjusts. If the book jackets don't give us pictures of female Homo sapiens being dragged by their hair through 2 or 3 million years of he-man evolution, we are left to assume this was the situation. This, despite the known fact that among contemporary and historic hunting and gathering people, as among our remote hunting and gathering ancestors, 75% to 80% of the group's sustenance comes from the women's food gathering activities. This, despite the known fact that the oldest tools used by contemporary hunters and gatherers, and the oldest, most primal tools ever found in ancient sites, are women's digging sticks. This, despite worldwide legends that cite women as the first users and domesticators of fire. This, despite the known fact that women were the first potters, the first weavers, the first textile dyers and hide tanners, and the first to gather and study medicinal plants, the first doctors, and on and on. Observing the linguistic interplay between mothers and infants, mothers and children, and among work groups of women, it is easy to speculate on the female contribution to the origin and elaboration of language. That the first time measurements ever made, the first formal calendars, were women's lunar markings on painted pebbles and carved sticks, is also known. And it is thoroughly known that the only God image ever painted on rock, carved in stone, or sculpted in clay, from the upper Paleolithic to the middle Neolithic, and that's roughly 30,000 years, was the image of a human female. In 1948, The Gate of Horn published in Britain. In 1963, it was published in America, retitled Religious Conceptions of the Stone Age. In this pioneering work, archaeologist and scholar G. Rachel Levy showed the unbroken continuity of religious images and ideas descending from the Cro-Magnon peoples of the Upper Paleolithic period in Ice Age Europe through the Mesolithic and Neolithic developments in the Near East and down to our own historical time. As Levy noted, these early people are lost to us in the mists of time, but their primal visions and images and gestalts of human experience on this planet still resonates in our psyches, as well as in our historic religious ontological symbols. These early Stone Age people bequeathed to all humanity a foundation of ideas upon which the mind could raise its structures. And what were these primal human images and ideas? The cave as the female womb, the mother as a pregnant earth, the magical, fertile female as the mother of all animals, the Venus of La Salle, standing with the horn of the moon upraised in her hand, the cave as the female tomb where life is buried, painted blood red and awaiting rebirth. Levy shows the continuity of these images and symbols through the late Neolithic Near Eastern rites and mythologies and their endurance 30,000 years later in modern religions. In Christianity, for example, with its central image of the birth of the sacred child in a cave-like shelter surrounded by magic animals, and especially in Catholicism, the icon of the Great Mother who stands on the horned moon and awaits the rebirth of the world. The evidence leaves no doubt that these images were at the origins of what we call human psychological and spiritual expression. Levy's book is a masterpiece. It received great praise upon both its British and American publications and has since been virtually bypassed and ignored by anthropological, archaeological, academic establishments. Why? Because her evidence is irrefutable. It shows with clarity and in the solidity of stone and bone that the first 30,000 years of Homo sapiens' existence was dominated by a celebration of the female processes, of the mysteries of menstruation, pregnancy, and childbirth, of the analogous abundance of the earth, of the seasonal movements of animals and the cycles of time and the great round of the mother. The Gate of Horn is as close as we can come to reading the sacred book of our early human ancestors, and it confirms what too many people do not want to know, that the first God was female. Since Levi wrote, the tendency had been to relegate these old Stone Age and Neolithic images to the psychological realm. They've become archetypes of the unconscious and so forth, while anthropological writers, proper, both academic and popular, continue to explain physical, real human development solely in terms of the experiences of the male body in hunting, aggression, and tool-making. Thus, the female images, which are there and cannot be denied, are sideswiped and reduced to the subjective and mythic realms, and thus the first 30,000 years of our human history is denied to us, relegated to a mind trip or a psychological software. Even among feminists in recent years, there has risen doubt that these images and symbols might be anything but mythology, unrealities. To approach our human past and the female god, we need a wagon with at least two wheels. One is the mythical, historical, archaeological, and the other is the biological, anthropological. A strong track has already been laid down for the mythical, historical, archaeological wheel. Milestones along that track, along with G. Rachel Levy's great work, are J. Backafin's Myth, Religion, and Motherite, Robert Briffault's The Mothers, Helen Diner's Mothers and Amazons, Jessie Weston's From Ritual to Romance, Robert Graves' The White Goddess, O.G.S. Crawford's The Eye Goddess, Sybil von Kless-Reden's In the Realm of the Great Goddess, Michael Dame's Silbury Treasure and Avebury Cycle, Marija Gambuti's The Goddess and the Gods of Old Europe, and most recently Elizabeth G. Davis's The First Sex, Merlin Stone's When God Was a Woman, and Ancient Mirrors of Womanhood, Phyllis Chesler's Women and Madness, and About Men, Adrienne Rich's Of Women Born, Mary Daly's Beyond God the Father, Gynecology and Pure Lust, Susan Griffin's Women in Nature, Anne Cameron's Daughters of Copper Women, and many, many more, including the richly useful Women's Encyclopedia of Myths and Secrets by Barbara G. Walker. The other side of our wagon, the biological, anthropological side, has almost no wheel and no track. Not because there is no important place to go in that direction, but because the physical, cultural anthropologists are of somewhere else, busily mapping the evolution of Tarzan. There is no body of anthropological work based on the evolution of female biology. With rare exceptions, there have been no attempts whatsoever to study the evolution of human physiology and cultural organization from pre-hominid to modern man, from the perspective of the definitive changes undergone by the female in the process of that evolution. Popular books on this subject by Lionel Tiger, Desmond Morris, et al. Are invariably male-oriented, treating the evolution of the female as sex object only, from monkey in heat to hot bunny. One delightful exception is Elaine Morgan's The Descent of Woman. During 12 million years of dry Pliocene, Morgan speculates the female pre-hominid took the oceans, surviving in the warm and food-filled coastal waters, and during this experience underwent a sea change from knuckle-walking rear-sex primate to upright human sexual body, to which the male primate responded by becoming man. Morgan argues convincingly that the human species survived the long Pliocene drought through the cooperation and social invention of the evolving hominid females and their adaptation to the sea. Academic experts ignore this theory, but they have no other explanation for our Pliocene survival, for our successful evolution from ape to human during this difficult period, or for the many ways in which our human bodies resemble the bodies of sea mammals rather than primates. In the time following bodies to take light, historian William Irwin Thompson points out that early human evolution occurred in three critical stages. 1. Hominization, in which our primate bodies became human, not only in walking upright and freeing the hands, but specifically in our sexual characteristics and functions. 2. Symbolization, in which we began using speech, marking time, painting and sculpting images. And 3. Agriculturalization, in which we domesticated seeds and began control of food production. And, as Thompson writes, all three stages were initiated and developed by the human female. The symbol-making and agricultural stages have been studied, and the originating role of women in these stages is known. It is sexual hominization which, as yet, has barely been explored. Why? Why indeed? Because sexual hominization is almost exclusively the story of the human female. The mechanics and anatomy of male sexuality, after all, haven't changed greatly since the primates made love. The revolution in human sexuality, the revolution that made us human, resulted from evolutionary changes that occurred in the female body. These changes were not primarily related to mammalian reproduction, but to human sexual relationship. No one knows the order in which these occurred, but taken together as an evolved cluster of sexual characteristics, they constitute a truly radical sexual metamorphosis undergone by the human female. Elimination of the estrous cycle and development of the menstrual cycle meant that women were not periodically in heat, but capable of sexual activity at any time. Pregnancy could occur during a part of the cycle, but for most of the cycle, sex could happen without necessarily resulting in pregnancy. Among all other animals, the estrous cycle determines that copulation always results in pregnancy and has no other than reproductive purpose. Development of the clitoris and evolution of the vagina meant a greatly enhanced sexuality and orgasmic potential in human females compared to all other animals. The change from rear to frontal sex, we can imagine, created an enormous change in relations between the sexes. Frontal sex means a prolonged and enhanced lovemaking period and what might be called the personalization of sex. The emotion-evoking role of face-to-face intercourse in the development of human self-consciousness has yet to be evaluated. She turned around and looked him in the eye, and there was light. Development of breast added to women's potential for sexual arousal. Further, combined with frontal sex, no doubt females' maternal and social feelings were also now aroused by the personal lover, whose body was now analogous to the infant's body at her breast. As Thompson points out, such radical changes in the female body alone were enough to trigger the hominization of the species. Human beings, with these changes, became the only creatures on Earth for whom copulation can occur any time for non-reproductive purposes. Human sex thus became a multi-purpose activity. It can happen for emotional bonding, for social bonding, for pleasure, for communication, for shelter and comfort, for personal release, for escape, as well as for reproduction of the species. And this is one of the original and major determining differences between humans and all other animals, birds, reptiles, insects, fishes, worms, for whom copulation exists only and solely for species reproduction. The human race has been definitively shaped by the revolution of the female body into a capacity for non-reproductive sex. This is not just a physical fact. It is a cultural, religious, and political fact of primary significance. Many feminists today are unsure whether studies of evolutionary biology or of religious mythology can have political relevance for contemporary women. We believe that nothing can be more politically relevant than knowing why we got where we are now by seeing how we got here and where we began. In the beginning, the first environment for all new life was female, the physical, emotional, spiritual body of the mother, and the communal body of women, young girls, grown women, older women, working together. When hunting and gathering people move, the infant is carried bound close to the mother's body. When they settle, the women form an inner circle campsite of women and children. The socialization process begins here. Human culture is marked by a strengthening and prolongation of the relation between mothers and offspring. For its first year, the human child is virtually an embryo outside the womb, extremely vulnerable and totally dependent. Female group behavior, the cooperative care sharing among mothers and children, older and younger women, and the tasks of daily life emerges from the fact of this prolonged dependence of the human child on the human female for its survival. Males help, but they also leave. The male body comes and goes, but the female presence is constant. Females train, discipline, and protect the young beyond infant care. The maintenance and leadership of the entire kin group is the task of women. The female animal is always on the alert. For on her rests the responsibility not only of feeding the young, but of keeping the young from being food for others. She is the giver and also the sustainer of beginning life. Among humans, males help with protection and food acquisition, but it is the communal group of females that surrounds the child in its first 4 to 6 years of life with a strong physical, emotional, traditional, and linguistic presence. And this is the foundation of social life and human culture. The popular image of early human society as being dominated, indeed created, by sexist male hunters and ferocious territorial headbangers just doesn't hold water. If the first humans had depended solely on despotic and aggressive male leaders, or on several males in chronic ritualistic contention for power, human society would never have developed. Human culture could have never been invented. The human presence on earth would never have evolved. The fact is that it was from this first inner circle of women, the campsite, the firesite, the cave, the first hearth, the first circle of birth, that human society evolved. As hominids evolved into Paleolithic Homo sapiens and then into settled and complex Neolithic village people on the time edge of civilization, these tens of thousands of years of human culture were shaped and sustained by communities of creative, sexually and physically active women, women who were inventors, producers, scientists, physicians, lawgivers, visionary shamans, artists, and so much more. Women who were also the mothers, receivers, and transmitters of terrestrial and cosmic energy. We have to understand how and why these ancient millennia of women cultures have been buried, ignored, denied, passed off as mythology or primitive prehistoric origins by Western male historians who insist, and often really believe, that real history began only about 5,000 years ago with the relatively recent institutions of patriarchy. So the preface is called Wheel Life. This book is a wheel. She began. It begins and ends with the word beginning. Like a year, it has 4 parts, 52 chapters, 4 seasons, 52 weeks, 13 lunations, though not symmetric. A she wheel. It unrolls her story, a description of the female journey through our human time on Earth. Gyrocycles of great myth and small data, poetry and numbers, dream and invention. Ice and fire. Cro-Magnon caves and inquisitional burnings. Night and day. Her silent presence and his noisy history. And this new edition appears now in 1991. 9, the magic number of muses, crones, and that first minstrel, mathematically observed wheel, the moon. 1, which we are and must become. Wheels within wheels within wheels, cellular, personal, local, global, cosmic, and begin again. Chapter 2, Marx and the Matriarchy. Ancient women-oriented groupings were the original communism. Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx recognized this. Engels especially refers to the mother-right concepts of J.J. Bachofen, and both men based their analysis of social development on the primary existence of ancient matriarchies, i.e., communal matrifocal systems. In this, they were influenced by the writings of Lewis Morgan, an American anthropologist. Morgan lived with and studied the tribal society of the Iroquois. In their kinship structure, language, and customs, he found evidence of early communal and blood relationships based on different stages of group marriage. In Ancient Society, written in the 1880s, Morgan offered his conclusion that such a society was matrilinear and matrifocal, of necessity, since within a group marriage structure, only the mother can be definitely known as the parent of a child. We now know that similar evidence can be found all over the world. For example, many kinship systems distinguish between the biological father of a child and the social father, who is usually the mother's brother or other male relative. The social father is considered the real father in these societies. Identity and inheritance are passed along through the female bloodlines. But pioneers that they were, neither Morgan, Engels, nor Marx were fully aware of women's real functions and achievements in past cultures. Nor were they turned into the total gestalt of early peoples. With Marx and Engels, and in particular with their dogmatic interpreters and followers, a narrowing of focus to strictly economic and class analysis has totally obscured the original human state of being, which was more profoundly spiritual than economic. This Marxist narrowing of focus and its consequent denial of human spiritual experience has had tragic repercussions throughout the world. How did this happen? Karl Marx, and Engels as well, was a deeply compassionate man. His opium of the people statement, which is never fairly quoted, is evidence of this. Religious distress is at the same time the expression of real distress and the protest against real distress. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of the heartless world, just as it is the spirit of a spiritless situation. It is the opium of the people. The demand to give up the illusions about its conditions is the demand to give up a condition that needs illusions. Criticism has plucked the imaginary flowers from the chain, not so that men will wear the chain without any fantasy or consolation, but so that they will break the chain and cull the living flower. No one has said it better or more clearly recognized the human being's absolute right to cling to spirit in a spiritless situation and to heart in a heartless world, because spirit and heart are real, and they alone have helped millions of human beings survive in otherwise unsurvivable situations. The tragedy of Marx and of Marxists was to confuse spirit with established religions. They saw clearly and historically that established religion aligned itself with the oppressor, the oppressing class, the oppressing monarchy, the oppressing social and economic systems. They saw the seeds of oppression in religious doctrines, doctrines that rationalize poverty and enslavement and excuse brutal tyranny and greed by setting God's seal on social systems based on hierarchies of rich and poor, hierarchies of rulers and the ruled. They saw the wealth and power of the churches and the wretched passivity of the believers. They saw that the church was in fact a very man-made institution that gained and retained power by exploiting the reality of the spirit versus the reality of physical need. They heard sermons condemning material wealth and earthly pleasures, while the churchmen and their rich supporters lived in opulent security, and the mass of believers lived on their stony knees in rags. And they heard these conditions justified as God's plan for man. They saw that religious establishments take it upon themselves to define spirit and God and human destiny, always in their own elitist terms and only to their own worldly advantage. Seeing these things, Marxists rightly condemned the collusion of established religions and the historic oppression of human beings. Tragically, they also denied the reality of the human spirit and its genuine longings. They rightly wanted to save humanity from religious exploitation, but in their narrowing of focus, their economic and class reductiveness, they split the human being into two conflicting parts: material existence versus spiritual existence. This split was just the mirror image of the already existing religious dualism. As dogmatic Marxist communism unfolded in country after country, this split reinforced the same alienation of human condition that Marx had wanted to resolve. It has created the dreary state capitalism of Soviet Russia and its satellites, in which the state works dourly and mechanically to enforce its definition of human life as a spiritless mechanism. It has given fuel to the propaganda engines of the reactionary systems in all countries, so that the world is ripped apart in a false dichotomy between godless communism and divine capitalism. For if communism is atheistic, its opponents can claim to be mandated by God, however phony this claim might be. Finally, it has turned away untold millions of oppressed human beings who need the economic and social analysis of Marxism to clarify and change their situations, but who fear they are being asked to buy this analysis at the price of their living souls. No matter how corrupt and collusive the established religions of the world are known to be, they still stand there, offering themselves as the only sanctuaries of spirit in a spiritless world. Marxism stands, unfortunately, in the perception of too many people as a total, fanatical repudiation of spiritual reality. And this perception of Marxism has helped to fuel the equally fanatic revivals of fundamentalist religions throughout the world today. Marx and Engels confused spirit with established religion, as their doctrinaire followers continue to do, because as Western white males, they could not see the total paradigm of ancient women's original communism. Coming from this linear, fragmenting, and reductive Western tradition, which was historic roots in the Judeo-Christian Bible as well as in Aristotelian, Platonic, Greco-Roman hyper-rationality, they could not comprehend the primal holism of human experience on earth. As a result, Marxism tends to reinforce rather than oppose Western's capitalism's notorious strategy of alienation. Marxist analysis generally are obsessed with isolating economic, productive development from magical, religious, sexual development. As Paul Cardin, a libertarian thinker, writes, "There is the Marxist assumption that throughout history, human societies have always aimed first and foremost to increase production and consumption, but the human being doesn't at birth bear within itself the finishing meaning of her, his, or his life. The maximization of consumption, or of power, or of sanctity, are not tendencies inherent in the newborn child. It is the prevailing culture in which he or she will be brought up in, which will teach him or her that he or she needs these things. The cultivation of maize among the Mexican tribes, or the cultivation of rice in some Indonesian villages, is not only a means of ensuring food. Agricultural labor is also lived as goddess and child worship, as festival and as dance. And when some Marxist theoretician comes along and claims that one of these occasions, everything which is not directly productive labor is but mystification, illusion, or cunning of reason, it must be forcibly pointed out that he is himself a far more complete personification of patriarchy and capitalism than any mere boss could be. What he is saying is that everything that humans have done or sought to do in history was only crude prefigurations of the factory system. If the Marxist in this case was denouncing or trying to eliminate patriarchal religion, founded on privilege and property and mystification of reality, and functioning through the exploitation of human labor and human sexuality, that would be fine. But he is also denying what is the very truth of human existence and the essence of the original matriarchies, the experienced unity of psychic, productive, sexual, cosmic power and activity in the egalitarian collective of women. For this is precisely what patriarchy sets out to do, to split material production from spiritual experience, science from magic, medicine from herbal knowledge, and psychic seasonal environment, sexuality from the sacred, art from craft, astronomy from astrology, language from poetry, and to place the resultant specialized, abstracted, and mechanistic knowledge in the hands of a privileged male elite organized into professions, hierarchies, and classes. To reduce the ecstatic dance of muscle, blood, and soul to factory assembly lines, production output schedules, and the gross national product. Patriarchy divides life into higher and lower categories, labeled spirit versus nature or mind versus matter, and typically in this alienated symbolism, the superior spirit mind is male and or white, while the inferior nature matter is female and or black. This false dualistic symbolism arises from an enforced order of male domination. With the aid of such phallic psychology, men can then go about the earth raping nature, exploiting resources and human labor, manipulating and improving her with technological, mechanical inventions and progressive goals. In patriarchy, man separates from earth, emulating some aloof and disconnected sky god of his own creation, and this intellectual separation makes him feel free to devastate the natural world without any sense that it belongs to a common ecosystem with himself. He exploits it, totally alienated from the fact of his own continuity with it. For the deluded profit of the few and the existential pain of the many, patriarchy exists by destroying the original holism. When it refutes or opposes the reality of human spiritual experience, Marxist communism does not resolve this destruction. It only compounds it with a different rhetoric. It gets rid of God and church only to substitute another tyranny, that of the state or the machine or the party or the production quota. It does not truly free human beings. It only changes the brand name of the chains. A truly human politics must study the entire history of the world's religions and spiritual beliefs. It must try to return to or move toward spiritual systems that are harmonious with all our visions of creative communal life, because this is what is missing under both of the competing world powers, a creative communal life. Both systems, Western capitalism and Soviet communism, are based on the denial of communal celebration. For celebration is a play of the spirit, and there is no profit in communal existence. But human evolution, human creativity is a real miracle and a cosmic fact. We need a politics that participates in this biological, spiritual adventure. Neither the God of the dollar, nor the God of the state, nor any of the alienating patriarchal gods from which they descend allow for this participation. Wilhelm Reich is not commonly connected with Marxism, but this is where he began. His early work was an attempt to link the Marxist economic class analysis with a psychoanalytical understanding of the significance of sexual repression in the development of fascist patriarchal society. This attempt was mostly successful, and for it he was excommunicated by both the European Communist Party and the Freudian psychoanalytical circles, i.e., he was onto something. In The Mass Psychology of Fascism and other work in the 1930s, Reich chronicled the successful manipulation of the German people by Nazi ideology. On the deepest psychological and biological levels, he argued, the people had already been conditioned by generations of religious and culturally directed psychosexual repression to respond obediently and to cooperate unquestioningly with sadism, tyranny, and genocide. An anti-sexual religious morality, paranoid concepts of blood purity, and a rigid sense of ethnic superiority had already wired the nervous system of the torturer and clenched the muscles inside the black gloves and boots. As Reich predicted, in fact, a hypnotic leader like Hitler does not create these conditions, he only exploits them. Fascism is not a wild, barbaric phenomenon that appears suddenly and without reason in the midst of civilization. It is the result of a long conditioning process, and the institutions that do the conditioning are those of the civilization itself. One of Reich's major points was that Marxist communism and European socialism generally narrowed down to an objective focus on economic and class relationships, were unable to anticipate, analyze, or prevent the Nazi triumph, which was a massively subjective explosion of a pathologically conditioned people into brutal expression. Further, the syndrome of fascism was not confined to the Germans. Fascist thought and behavior is not a national aberration, but a historically ingrained feature of the psyche of all Western civilized people, a feature clearly visible in the history of Western colonialism and imperialism. Reich's political point was this. At this point in history, changing the objective economic social systems alone is not enough. Repressive behavior, sadistic power relations, competitive greed to exploit, dominate, and humiliate, and our accommodations to these insults are by now conditioned into the nervous systems of each member of our civilized societies. Both oppressors and victims are damaged by the experience. The repressive wiring of the nervous system occurs at the most intimate levels of sex and of the spirit. The recreation of the human being must occur on these levels also if we desire a truly human revolution, one that does more than just change the guard. This point is of importance to feminists, who have already observed that sexist, dominating male behavior can occur along the entire political spectrum from right to left. The repression, control, and exploitation of female sexuality is a major tool of patriarchy because it goes hand in hand with the exploitation of female labor. Left-wing males who see no connection between labor exploitation and sexual exploitation have failed to make a total analysis. Or in Reich's terms, they have failed to undergo a total revolution. On the neuron level, they are still wired for oppression. Reich pointed out in the 1930s that the prevalent male sexual fantasy in male-dominated society is one of rape, and he knew that this was not a personal fantasy, but a political one, with political repercussions. He was very clear on how sexual repression of women has been the most powerful patriarchal weapon in creating social victims. Females who have been weakened, made dependent, fearful, or ashamed of our own bodies and punished for their functions. Sexual, psychological prey to any predator. Such creatures are easy to exploit politically and economically. People who do not own their own sex cannot own their own labor. Unfortunately, Reich was a strict heterosexual, unsympathetic to homosexuality, and too influenced by Freudian ideas of female sexuality, and these problems have passed along to us at the expense of his gifts. Reich missed the connection between bisexuality and psychic wholeness, but in his comprehension of the profound and intentional links between sexual repression and political repression, he was always right on target. Marx said, "Human power is its own end." Reich was devoted to the liberation and enjoyment of healthy human power as the only valid political goal. Biological energy, unrepressed and undistorted, he saw as a continuum of cosmic energy, with no non-organic distinctions made between the physical and the spiritual. He saw both forms as of one energy. He called it orgone. Manifest throughout the universe, the same in nerve cells as in stars and in human consciousness. This evolutionary energy surging through all life forms, and as an energy field in space, he defined as a spiritual reality as well as a physical force. And he believed that politics included the realignment of the repressed human being with its original creative flow, i.e., Reich was no mechanistic ideologue, but a political mystic. Therefore, he banished from the Communist Party and psychoanalytical professional circles in Europe. He had to flee Nazi Germany. He ended up in the United States with his books destroyed by the federal government and his work outlawed, and he died in a federal prison. He was probably onto something. Another problem area among Marxists is the assumption that matriarchal society, where it existed, occurred only at a very low stages of production and under only primitive conditions. This assumption echoes the generalized linearity and chauvinism of Western history, which tend to see all other cultures, other in space or in time, as mere preliminary stages on the way toward modern development, or as sadly failed attempts to achieve the free way and the ball bearing. In fact, the evidence shows that some of the most advanced societies of the ancient world, technologically as well as culturally advanced, were also matrifocal, i.e., woman-oriented and led by women. The early Cretans were worshippers of the goddess, and Cretan women were priestesses, judges, doctors, artisans, athletes, business entrepreneurs, cultural leaders on all levels. Crete was the major cultural and trading center of its day, with ships traveling to Ireland, Spain, Africa, and the Near East for gold and tin. One of the things exported was the Cretan lineal script, whose syllabary was then passed on through the Greeks to the Phoenicians. At home, the Cretans had indoor baths with hot and cold water running through the ceramic pipes. Cretan plumbing in 1700 BC was far superior to anything achieved in Europe until well after AD 1700. The graceful and artistic Etruscan were also matriarchal, and so were the early Egyptians. Traces of matriarchy existed in Egypt down through the later empires and dynasties. In these cultures, as in many others, the family group lived on land that belonged collectively to the mothers. A woman's husband or lover lived with the woman and her kin group. Children, regardless of the father's identity or legal relation, lived with the mother's family group. Ancient Egyptian law clearly designated that all family property, land, and household goods belonged to the woman, and that she, married or unmarried, had total disposition of her own belongings, including herself. No one studying the Cretans, Etruscans, or Egyptians could refer to these cultures as primitive. Very advanced cultures were also developed by the matriarchal Dahomey and Ashanti peoples of West Africa and by the Naya people of Kerala in southern India. Among Native Americans, it is largely the matrifocality of the Pueblo people that has allowed them to endure so long in their old ways, with strong architectural technologies developed among them. The dwelling places of all these people, from portable grass huts to multi-storied apartment buildings, were not simply maintained by women, women built them. Everywhere, home site technology was originally seen as women's province. We are not saying that matriarchy was a system in which the women went around ruling everyone with a big stick. Matriarchies are not built on dominance principles, but on the facts of blood kinship, including the primacy of the mother. Women owned their bodies, their children, and their living properties. Women made vital decisions affecting the survival and well-being of their people. There was no way by which an elite group of men could set up laws to restrict women's movements, ideas, or sexual activities. Economic relations were not experienced as separate from religious and social relationships. They were originally based on gift exchange, which served a communal bonding function, not a competitive or profit-making one. Material goods had value only in terms of the social or spiritual uses to which they were put. If Marxists tend to underrate ancient matrifocal cultures as primitive or underdeveloped, this is only because Marxists shared Western prejudices about development. They are assuming that all cultures, ancient and modern, are to be judged according to how close they come to approximating the industrial factory system with its quantitative production, regardless of the life quality of the cultures being evaluated. And this prejudice, Marxists and stock market men seem to share equally.